I'm Jyoti Rambhai. I'm here at Pay360, the Payments Association's flagship conference. So one of the biggest topics being discussed today is artificial intelligence, or AI, and the use of it in the payment sector. Now, in order to unpack some of the key themes we're seeing, with me here today is Peter Harmston from KPMG. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you, Jyoti.
So everyone seems to be talking about AI right now. Just last week, the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, announced the launch of AI Sandbox as part of his fiscal budget, which he hopes will encourage groundbreaking research in the science and technology sector. So what role do you think AI will play in the payment sector?
Thanks, Jyoti. I think there's a couple of big parts to that. One, I think it's awesome that the funding's been announced and there's more investment in this sector because it allows innovation, it allows people to flourish and fintechs to flourish. I think your question about where does payments sit on this, I think AI sits across all the payments at the moment already.
Yeah.
But I think if we think about what's happening in payments right now, if we think about the ISO 20022 implementation across high value payments and across SWIFT, we talk about the introduction of the MPA. We talk about what's happening in the payments value chain end to end, be that customer onboarding initially, be that fraud, be that sanctions, be that kind of manual checking for exceptions processes. All of that either has basic AI in it now or should have more AI as AI develops over time.
If you don't mind expanding on that, where exactly are banks using AI right now, and in what part of their process should they start using AI more?
We're all probably quite familiar with some kind of parts of AI already. So the kind of most traditional part we're used to now is chatbots. I think which everyone uses. Most of us get quite frustrated with sometimes, and I think the challenge there is chatbots are great for very basic things, but when it comes to identifying an annoyed customer or an irritated customer or something that's slightly different to usual, that's when chatbots kind of reach their limitations. But that is a basic use of AI. I think we've got, when we come to often people put RPA or robotic process automation in the same bucket as AI. It's not AI, but for the sake of this conversation, RPA is used extensively across the banks to basically mimic what humans are doing. And that's why it's always quite relatively compared to AI, because a human presses this button, therefore a robot can do that. So it's already there kind of in spades as well. I think the last place where it's used quite extensively already is kind of NLP, which is another kind of part of AI. And there we're talking, large banks were doing large-scale remediations, large-scale document reviews, and they're using NLP to review millions and millions of documents, pull out that information, and then to be able to present it back to a human. So you're really seeing this is all around efficiency and effectiveness, and that's what the banks are using it for right now. But I think the future may be different.
Okay, so in terms of funding and access to funding, now the Chancellor's AI Sandbox program offers a chance for innovators to get £1 million each year over the next decade. So with access to more funding, how and why should banks and fintechs work more closely together to develop technology that you've suggested for customers, businesses and merchants across the spectrum?
That's a good question. I think the part here, if we kind of look back in time a little bit, if I look at when I originally worked in banking many years ago, fintechs and banks didn't work together. The banks thought they could do it all themselves, and fintechs were trying to battle and work with the banks. I think what we're seeing now is a very different dynamic. The banks have the customer base, they have the regulatory oversight, they have the ability to be able to grow and the investment funds to be able to grow, but they don't necessarily have the agility and some of the kind of really forward-thinking innovations that fintechs have. So the point here is they both bring something to the relationship, and what we've been finding a lot more, hence why we're here at Pay360 today and why there's a lot of fintechs and banks talking together, is they need to work together to come up with the best products. And what I'm finding now is that's happening a lot more and more. Over the last week or so, there's been a number of further partnerships that have been announced by the banks with fintechs to be able to deliver really great customer outcomes. And I think this has got to continue. But I think what we've seen is an appreciation of the difference. Banks are big, they take a lot of time to often make decisions, etc. And fintechs want to move quickly and rapidly and deliver stuff. And I think now they've got an appreciation of how each other works, so now they can kind of work together to deliver some really exciting outcomes for customers, for business, and for merchants around payments more broadly, but specifically about taking AI and putting it across the whole value stream of a payment, being that enhancing fraud, AML, KYC, and really making chatbots a lot more intelligent as well, and actually having a conversation with them.
Okay, so like as technology develops, as it gets smarter then, so it's not just about helping the banks or the business, it's also about helping users. But how can AI then add value in areas such as regulation and compliance or tackling fraud? Because there's still big issues that are affecting the industry.
I think you're spot on. And if I think about the use cases, and probably the biggest application, or should be application further in AI, is the things you mentioned there. So we think about fraud. So the stats often change, but 1% of fraud is detected. AI is already used in fraud, but not extensively enough. So the investment where fintechs and banks need to be getting together is in fraud and future prevention, and figuring out how we use the data across the whole ecosystem, be that from social media platforms, be that from telecommunications company and the banks, and then using AI to go, how can we really prevent fraud, take it from 1% to 3% to 10% to 50%. So that is, to me, an absolute use case that needs to be focused on. We then think about compliance. Okay, we've all got to be compliant. It's an important part to the mainstay of us as an economy and a regulated economy. And compliance is always changing, and it's rapidly changing, especially in many different countries. So here you can use AI to review compliance, understand what the compliance means, and then present it to someone going, this is what you need to do, and this is what you need to be implementing. So using AI to be able to do that and to be able to facilitate that. I think the other piece where we need to see more AI in payments is kind of initial before we start, which is KYC and KYB. KYC and KYB is a convoluted processes. Onboarding takes a long time. There's a lot of documentation involved with multiple sources. How do we use AI to make that slick and convenient and simple for the merchant, the business, or the customer to be able to do that? And I think the last part where we have seen AI, but I think again needs to take another step, is around sanction screening. Sanction screening, the volume of people, processes, and technology involved in sanction screening is substantial. How do we use AI to make that slick, to make it to really making sure we're on a real-time basis using AI to screen for sanctions? And to me, they are probably the 3 or 4 things that AI needs to be using when it comes to compliance, reg, and fraud, and really probably the mainstay of where AI should be used.
Okay. So with that, what are the challenges then facing businesses and regulators when it comes to then implementing AI in their processes and systems?
There's a couple of pieces there. I think from a regulator's perspective, I think there's a couple. The key bit there is understanding. And it's always the way, and we talk about, okay, what's the future of the metaverse? What's the future of central bank digital currencies? What's the future? And people go, all the buzzwords are used. And the regulators sitting there going, okay, what does that actually mean? How do we protect the economy? How do we protect consumers and businesses? So I think the regulators need to be brought on the journey. And we talk about how they get brought on the journey, and we've got obviously ChatGPT version 4 out now, and everyone gets very excited. But I don't think we're doing enough to bring the regulators on the journey. Because I think if they're on the journey about what AI can do and what AI can do to help the economy, like we talked about in compliance and fraud, etc., then I think it'd be great. But they've got to help us. We've got to help them understand what it is. They can then help define the boundaries where the data flows and kind of then do what a regulator does best. But at the moment, AI, especially off the back of ChatGPT and what's happened in the last 6 months, it's a buzzword again. Even though it's been around for a long time, it's more of a buzzword now.
Okay, and you mentioned journey there. Is there an argument to say that regulation organisations falling behind as innovation steams ahead, or have we got a chance to bring the two and make it more aligned?
Yeah, I think we're going to your last point. I think we've got a chance to bring them aligned.
Yeah.
AI is in the mainstream, but banks and financial institutions are still cautious because it may not be you are regulating AI specifically, but you obviously a bank is highly regulated, and so it should be.
Yeah.
So banks are still quite cautious in where in the value chain it is. Yes, it may make a decision on should I let this payment through, but then that decision may then be verified by a human. It's just a lot of the legwork is being done by the robot or the AI.
Yeah.
So my view is I think banks will continue to be within their regulatory framework and still be quite cautious when it comes to implementing and doing more with AI, and they'll be working hand in hand with banks because no one wants to let the AI loose on their customers, because we think about if I let AI loose, let the chatbot loose, and it's having a conversation with me, actually what's that like from customer experience? What's that like from my brand? So I think the banks are being naturally cautious, therefore the regulators will go in lockstep with them.
So that brings me on to quite an interesting point, because when AI first came about, people were quite skeptical about it. They feared its uses, they feared its purposes, but now we're almost seeing it in people's everyday life. We talked about chatbots, there's ChatGPT, which seems to be a popular app now. I know a friend of mine has used it to write his dating profile. So, people are becoming more accustomed to artificial intelligence in their everyday lives. Now, what risks does that actually pose for both the user and the business?
Yeah, and I think we've got to have still a little bit of a healthy skepticism around where the risks lie. I think some companies around privacy and security. If I'm asking a ChatGPT, or I'm asking you, please can you write my profile, or please can you order a pizza, or please can you please do this, and here's my credit card number. Where is that data going? I'm talking to a robot that sounds like a human, so the privacy and security I think is still a huge consideration. And for users and businesses, they need to kind of still have that, really have that front of mind, because there's still risks to be associated with about that. I think I touched on it briefly. I think there's risks to businesses about thinking it's going to solve all the problems, and actually think about you still own your customer, you still own the customer experience. Don't expect AI to come along and solve everything. Own that customer experience, but use AI to leverage and to save you costs and to potentially enhance your experience, but don't let the robots do it all for you, because I think we'll be in not a great position.
Fair enough. Okay. And I guess my final question to you, Peter, is as we said, the payments landscape is changing rapidly, it's evolving, and what do you think the next development in AI will be to enter the market or tech, and when are we likely to see that?
Yeah, and I think this is, again, my crystal ball tells me in many different things, but not the winning lottery numbers. But there's a part here where I think we're going to see enhancements. So let's talk about chatbots to start.
Yeah.
Chatbots are generally fairly okay. You can manage to cancel a standing order. You can just about set up a direct debit, but you cannot apply for your mortgage. You can't open a current account. You can't go, oh, please can you investigate this payment for you? I wasn't quite sure what it was for. And that can't then talk back to me and say, Mr. Harmston, it was for this, and you spent it here. So there's a natural evolution, I think, with chatbots. And I don't like the word chatbot because it's got the word bot in it. Sounds like it is a robot. But for the audience, those who've used ChatGPT, it's like having a conversation. And we need to use that, and banking and payments need to use that to enhance the payments experience, which I think is an absolute key part of this. I think the central part, I think we'll see a significant, I talked about it earlier, is how it's used in fraud. Fraud has been talked a lot about here at Pay 360 is still a humongous problem. We still have, the vulnerable being done by APPs continuing to go up. We're trying to do a lot, but we're probably not using enough tools and AI as an industry to tackle fraud. So I'm really seeing probably over the next 24 months, a real uplift in using using AI in fraud especially. And I think also then there's probably an expansion of AI in banking. So yes, it's about the payment. I'll be able to say, Siri, please make a payment to James, just get it done, it'll happen. But I think it's about, with the branches and the unfortunate closure of many branches, how AI takes a place there. So I'm having a conversation, either a virtual conversation with a branch, in a virtual branch, or on the phone where I can interact, where it sounds like a human, but it's actually AI. And there's a real balance there from when I talked about having a customer relationship still, but a lot of our banking needs are still quite basic. So to be able to do that, but feel like it's a customer interaction. So how banking and payments moves towards that, I think over the next probably 12 to 24 months, I think it's going to be really interesting. But my caveat there again is always making sure you still own your brand and own your customer experience, and not pretend that the robot's going to do it for you.
Okay, that's great. Listen, thank you very much for your time today, Peter. And yeah, hope you enjoy the rest of Pay 360.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Joe. Thank you.
No
Thank
worries.
you.